Welcome back, everyone. I am pleased to be moderating the panel entitled Employing Innovative EB Approaches to Upscale Nature-Based Solutions. The panel includes a diverse set of voices and will focus on identifying and overcoming key barriers to adaptation planning and implementation through innovation in EBA, including through reaching across sectors and highlighting new approaches and opportunities. As earlier we were sharing that it's so critical that all three components of human well-being, that is social, ecological, and economic, all need to go concurrently. But there is so many challenges out there that when we go into field implementations and using data, new technology, intersectoral cooperation, there are so many silos. We are perhaps specialists in our own areas, but at the same time, it's critical that how to bring these different sets, interdisciplinary approaches, intersectoral cooperation, and breaking these silos. So we will be having this discussion very openly, candidly with our experts, and kindly ask any questions via chat in the conference app, and we will address them during question answer. Uh, our panelists today are Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig, NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and also part of the Earth Institute, Columbia University. Dr. Joth Singh, Caribbean EBA facility, which is part of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. Ms. Ariesta Ningrum with United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Ms. Cristina Romanelli, World Health Organization, and Dr. Philipp Behrens, from ICI, all are part of this discussion. So we will start with Dr. Cynthia, with you. And as a senior research scientist at NASA and also professor teaching, doing a lot of research, and also you had climate impact group. So what do you think is the big picture? What lessons have you learned, for example, with the 2020 adaptation gap report on NBS and upscaling? So over to you, Dr. Cynthia.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you. It's great to be part of the EbA Knowledge Day number 7. The 2020 Adaptation Gap Report had a special focus on nature-based solutions for adaptation, and I'm going to highlight what I think are the key messages. First is that we need improved and long-term monitoring and evaluation of the ongoing and the completed initiatives. This expansion of the evidence base is crucial to upscale the EbA implementation, and thereby being a key part is being able to link them much more effectively to financial flows. So long-term monitoring and evaluation is the first lesson. The second is to actively bring more concrete incorporation of NBS into the country planning for UNFCCC. And so we have a member on the panel here whom I'm sure will be talking about that. So just working to explicitly help countries to include EbA in their national adaptation planning processes, as well as their nationally determined commitments, and integrating both mitigation and adaptation sides and processes of EbA. Third is the climate risk, which is the part that our group works in the most. Critically, the planning and the implementation need to bring in the better information, better risk information about what the climate risks actually are. So those are the 3 lessons. I want to end with one big one, which is we need to work, as I mentioned, on adaptation as well, on mitigation as well as adaptation, because if the climate system keeps going and going and going, and we don't rein in greenhouse gas emissions, the climate change will limit the effectiveness of EBA. So that's why it's absolutely crucial that we bring the synergies between mitigation and adaptation together.
Thank you, Cynthia. Let's start with your last point before we go action on ground lessons learned. Mitigation adaptation, it's crucial. And again, mitigation is the key and adaptation is just an ad hoc sort of thing till we control gas emissions. With all the politics and all those, these are economic decisions which many a time come in the way of having this. But for even ad hoc basis, how long do you think, we need to have these interventions on ground where, say ecosystem services won't be, reduced, those what we are saying ecosystem based adaptation, nature based solutions, but nature is also at the receiving end. So can we do something? Are there any viable solutions to work on both ends? And how EBA you see can fit in well here?
Absolutely. I think a lot of actually the nature-based solutions are working on the mitigation side through the carbon storage in forests, afforestation, reforestation, of course, all the RED program as part of the UNFCCC. So I think that what is needed is to bring together those very really active use of nature-based solutions for mitigation, but then join them with how can these be adaptive for the ecosystems as well, and how the climate risk will be affecting those systems in an integrated way.
Okay, thank you. We will come back to these points and your other points. Let's go to Joth. And Joth, you've been working on field also and facilitating a finance mechanism in the Caribbean, and there are many initiatives going on. So would you share your experiences in the context of the regional perspective and how funding can best be maximized and what lessons are emerging from your work?
Great. Thanks so much, Ali, and thanks for the invitation to participate in the panel discussion and this EBA Day. I just wanted to start off by maybe sharing some information on the young sister in this group, that is the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which just started operations in 2012, and also to speak in the context of innovation, to say that the CBF is a regional environmental fund whose mission is to ensure continuous funding for conservation and sustainable development in the Caribbean. I mean, this certainly is one of the areas that we hear continuously flagged that it is an issue with regards to financing and funding. So when we refer to our sustainable financing architecture within the CBF, we see it as a mechanism designed by the Caribbean for the Caribbean to assist with that flow of funds coming into the region. The CBF currently has two main programs, and just to flag that, we have a conservation finance program, which is anchored by a $75 million endowment fund. And then we have the climate change program, which focuses on ecosystem-based adaptation with a $50 million sinking fund. This facility, the sinking fund, is currently supported by grant funding from the International Climate Initiative of Germany's BMU. This has been channeled through KfW. But although it is a sinking fund, the finances are invested and so generating interest, which is used to support in part the operations of the facility. And so in part, this is part of the sustainability exercise that we have engaged within the CBF. Just to share a little bit with you on the process that we have engaged to date, we have utilized competitive open calls for proposals where the EBA facility is distributing grants directly to local, national, and regional projects. The selection criteria for projects include action supporting policies, included those found in NAPs and NDCs, building capacity of local organizations, which I think we all agree is really a critical issue, supporting livelihoods of communities, which is a very integral part of the EBA approach. We're looking at innovative approaches, and as mentioned by Cynthia, the issue with regards to data, and so the submissions to the EBA facility has to be premised on solid data where that is available. To share with you that the facility has committed about $12 million through 11 grants so far. We are on the verge of supporting another 8 projects from our second call for proposals, which is going to be in the vicinity of about $11 million. The process so far has revealed some of these, which I will share with you. A huge demand for financial support to engage in adaptation efforts in the region. And just by example, the total request through the 2 calls for proposals that we have had to date has totaled over $200 million. Although in the context of our facility, it's just $50 million. We have realized as well that available baseline data is limited and has to be generated through project activities. So although there is very generic information on vulnerability studies available, data on the specific sites is very limited, and so investments need to be made to generate data. We feel that there is limited knowledge and capacity within the region for EBA action. There is also a recognition that there are limited case studies for the Caribbean demonstrating successful EBA interventions. And this, I think, is something that we need to aggressively move to fill. There is a tendency to opt for the traditional adaptation measures, and I think that it doesn't come as a surprise. And although it's a short-term result, and there's a question with regards to long-term viability, the islands within the region tend to opt for that option. As Cynthia mentioned, monitoring evaluation is generally weak, and we feel that needs to be strengthened, definitely, to be able to monitor how the investments are making a real impact. And a recognition in terms of our projects, which is currently on a 3-year time frame, that time frame is really insufficient to realize real adaptation impacts through EBA. And I think it's one of the things that we will have to address going forward, and maybe even see if that can be adjusted in our current stream of funding. To share some of the responses that we have had so far, to fill the gap in terms of knowledge, we have delivered training and workshop on ecosystem-based adaptation. The first workshop was delivered in 2020 in collaboration with GIZ, IUCN, and KFW. We have provided opportunities for the establishment of consortia operations so that international and regional organizations can partner with local organizations to implement projects and so build the capacity of local organizations. We have created opportunities to engage the private sector to implement projects, and I think this is one of the innovations with regards to financing available to support grant projects. And then we have also provided assistance in developing monitoring and evaluation plans. So we are anticipating that the facility will remain as a standing instrument within the CBF, and so we are actively promoting additional financing to support the ongoing role in the region. So I'll stop there, Ali. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joth. So it's there are some common threads coming, and as you pointed out, limited data, M&E aspects, limited capacities, and again being tilted towards traditional adaptation approaches. So these are, I think, all these common threads. I'll come back to all of you later after initial interventions. But M&E is very interesting. That why M&E, we are not able to invest more, or what is coming in the way of looking into this, and how can we further integrate it in our proposals and implementation planning. So let's come back to these. Let's first identify all the challenges which are coming, and for that, another in climate adaptation, mostly it is being led by environment and mainstream development organizations, and we are all really good at what we have been doing for last so many years. But now, as climate is moving target, we need to see how further we can bring in the scientific know-how, technology. So we are very happy that we have Ms. Ariesta Ningrum with us, who is the team lead of Policy and Strategy Unit in the Technology Subdivision of UNFCCC Secretariat. She leads the support for the intergovernmental processes on climate technology development and transfer and the work of the Technology Executive Committee. And we are very happy to share that with Technology Executive Committee and IUCN FIBA, we are setting up a working group who will be taking forward how to better mainstream technology into EBA and adaptation. So I'll come to you, Ariesta, now that what efforts you are, doing to mainstream it, and how, EBA, climate adaptation and resilience can be strengthened by technology, and what gaps you see in technology transfer. So over to you, Ariesta.
Thank you so much, Ali, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's such a good and great opportunity. Actually, this is my first time to be participating in an event that exclusively focuses on ecosystem-based adaptations. Just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert on ecosystem-based adaptation, so I'm here also to learn from you. However, first, probably I would like to mention a little bit about the work on the climate technology that we support at the UNFCCC context. Ali has mentioned that we supported the work of the Technology Executive Committee, but also we support the intergovernmental process, including negotiations on climate technology development transfer, technology need assessment of technology issues in the national reports such as NDC, biennial reports, and so on. But for those who do not know who the Technology Executive Committee or the TEC is a policy component of the technology mechanism established in 2010 by COP in Cancun, aimed to facilitate enhanced action on technology to support countries' mitigation and adaptation efforts. CTCN, or Climate Technology Center and Network, is the sister institutions, which is an operational arm of this technology mechanism. In 2015, in addition to support of the conventions, the Paris Agreement also decided that technology mechanisms shall serve the Paris Agreement. And we work based on this new mandate on innovations, innovative approaches, enabling environment, collaborations, and so on. So with regard to the technologies for adaptations, what the work that we have done is on the sectors identified as priorities by countries in their technology need assessment. For example, in 2014, we work on agriculture and water sectors, and in 2018, we work on the coastal zones technology in collaborations with the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage, and it's a very interesting work on there. But before sharing with you what we have encountered so far, I would just like to mention that so far what we mentioned by technology, or the concept of the technology here, involves three elements: the hardware, which is the physical tools; the software, which is represented by process, knowledge, and skills required in using the technology; as well as the orgware, which is the ownership and the institutional arrangements pertaining to a technology. So when we look into the technology for adaptations in particular, we always look into these three elements of this technology and try to make sure that the complementarity of these three elements to ensure the effective applications of technology. So from our work so far, there are a few barriers from the climate adaptation technology perspective. One thing, though, that we would like to mention here, that the adaptation technologies is applied normally in a very specific context, and therefore the barriers could vary. For example, when we look into the tools or technologies to do seasonal forecasts, The main barrier would be around on the understanding and awareness of technologies for of the new varieties, of the development of the resistant crop varieties in the agriculture. Some barriers related to the perception of new variety, the expense of the resistant variety, the access to markets, and so on. But also there are barriers that we identify as relates to the local level, institutional barriers, diverse objectives of stakeholders, and many more. I mentioned earlier about technology need assessment, which is a process that's undertaken by countries under the context of the convention, the climate convention, to determine their climate technology priorities. After a number of years, there were also a summary or the sums be able to synthesize the barriers associated with the adaptation technologies as reported by countries, which include, and I just mentioned the top 4 here, the economic and financial barriers. That's, for example, is a lack, inadequate access to finance, inappropriate incentives, and so on. The second is the policy, legal, and regulatory. So countries identify there is insufficient legal framework, insufficient enforcement of the policy, policy uncertainty, and many more. They also identify the third barrier, which is surrounding the institutional and organizational capacity. And the fourth is the human skills, lack of personal maintenance to maintain and operate the technologies. So in terms of the main lessons that we could draw from this is that, one, that the adaptation technologies is usually applied in a very specific context. And two, that improving understanding or knowledge or awareness of the technology or approach is the key to ensure successful application of adaptation technologies and to avoid maladaptations. And the third element or third main lessons is that the local innovations or spreading local innovation would require coordination and collaboration between multiple stakeholders. And this is a very important component, especially in the context of adaptations. I just mentioned like 1 more minute on with regard to the EBA, the tech, or we have not done a work specifically related to EBA. However, we already identify this in some of the work that back in 2014. For example, we identified the work by the IUCN on Siak Suala River Basin in the context of integrated water resource management. But we understand that there needs to be more and more integrated approach like this to address the climate issue. We already saw it when working on water agriculture, that there have to be synergies and integration across the both sectors, but also with the mitigation as another panel as already mentioned earlier. I will stop here, Ali, and I'm happy to continue providing information in the next round. Thanks.
Thank you, Ariesta. Yeah, as you pointed out, and there are many areas where I think the expertise which is available in the panel and also in EBA and different, they can pitch in and perhaps address at the local level, local innovation, all these 3 areas you identify in adaptation technology transfer. So we'll come back to this critical element because there is also, as you said, the perception issues. Many a time we think what we are doing is enough based on the resources and local expertise, but this technology, so many a time need to be created, so that we can see, because acceptance of a problem is the first step towards solution. So maybe many a time in technology adaptation and all these nature resource management, maybe if I can say, perhaps we are in bit of a denial that whatever we are doing is the silver bullet. No, we need to challenge ourselves that, whatever we have done in the past, maybe 20, 30 years, we need to change. As we always say, climate change is a moving target. So our response must be equally dynamic. And if it needs technology, we need to come in and have that and embrace technology, which we have done in our homes and houses for personal level, but maybe not what we do in this sector. So, that is a very good segue now towards another new area, which is, this unfortunate pandemic has made us very forcefully realize that One Health, which concept is there for decades, but how that can further strengthen our integrated approach on ground. What are the area? But first, what is One Health? How does it relate to climate adaptation, natural resource management, human well-being? So for that, I will request our colleague from WHO, Cristina Romanelli, who is the program officer and then, at WHO and has done a lot of work on interagency collaboration, on biodiversity, on overall management and lead scientific research and policy evaluation and analysis with the nexus of biodiversity, climate change and health at WHO. So over to you, Cristina.
Thank you so much, Ali, for that generous introduction, and also to all co-organizers, really, for the opportunity to say a few words for the 7th EbA Knowledge Day on behalf of WHO's Department of Environment, Climate Change and Health. I just have to note, that it's so visionary of you to invite the health sector to this dialogue. I'd be really interested and curious to see how many times in previous EbA Knowledge Days it was around this table. In any case, this is a terrific development, and I can't help but note how, terrifically interdisciplinary this particular panel is, and how other fellow co-panelists so far have really done a terrific job in setting the scene to step up ambition for EbA. So I couldn't possibly be happier to be here among you to discuss how integrated approaches to health, such as One Health in EbA, can considerably strengthen social and ecological resilience, maximizing co-benefits for people and planet. And in today's context, as you rightly noted, Ali, also importantly, bringing us closer to a healthy and green recovery from COVID-19. There's really no question in my mind that the current COVID-19 pandemic, which has absolutely disrupted and shaken the very fabric of our social, economic, and health systems the world over, is an absolute perfect example of our generalized systemic failure to make connections between the natural world and our socioeconomic and finance structures, including those that should aim to help us avert and prevent health and other risks associated with climate change. At a basic level, we all know that these structures require strategic partnerships. And now you were saying earlier, the environment sector has been doing such a great job in EbA, but I would beg to differ, because no. The environment sector has been doing a great job in many times in the development and implementation of EbA. Let me not take that away from you, but at the same time, now is not the time to pat ourselves on the back and tell ourselves how far we've come in response to climate change and biodiversity loss. It's really my great hope that this EbA Knowledge Day also recognizes the truly urgent need to break persistent silos and to come to common agreement on the need to expand, align, and find common ground between the health of our ecosystems, our climate, and the life-sustaining ecosystem services upon which we all depend, clearly, for our health and well-being. But why One Health? So a One Health approach can really allow us to achieve exactly that. Some of you may already know that One Health is essentially, it's an interdisciplinary approach that really seeks to bring together human, animal, plant, and ecosystem health. And it can do so both to ensure policy coherence, which is sorely needed, and to implement more coordinated programs on the ground and across relevant ministries focused on prevention, which under the right conditions can really facilitate a whole of government and whole of society approach. So why is this important? As you said, Ali, not because it's a hot new topic. It's absolutely not new, but it is new to EBA. And it also happens to be essential to catalyzing transformative change in a much more integrated manner. I mean, if we look at infectious diseases alone, we know that 60% of infectious diseases are of zoonotic origin. What does that mean? It means that they spill over from domesticated and wild animals into humans, and that 3/4 of those are derived from wildlife, which in turn, like humans, are reliant on healthy ecosystems to survive and thrive. So what One Health does is that it enables us to look at ecosystems, plants, animals, domesticated and wild, and people in a much more integrated way, and to really understand how global environmental changes, such as climate change, such as biodiversity loss, can really modulate those health outcomes. And this doesn't only apply to wild animals, but also domesticated, as well as other disease vectors, such as mosquitoes. So, for instance, a more integrated One Health approach can really bring us closer to understanding how the positive feedback loops between climate change and land use changes, such as deforestation, can combine to influence the distribution patterns of disease vectors, for instance, driving our vulnerability to infectious disease emergence. And COVID-19 has been one example of that. So the links between healthy ecosystems, climate change, and human health really do run across a very wide spectrum of ecosystem services. And I think that it's really important that we bear that in mind when we're talking about One Health. And the benefits that ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation measures essentially aim to safeguard. It can give us a more integrated view of that big picture, potential co-benefits, but also importantly, a better understanding of trade-offs, rather than assuming that every EBA, EBM, or NBS measure necessarily implies a human health benefit. So essentially, One Health can really bring us closer to understanding how a robust set of policy measures really need to cut across the need to transform our food systems, the need to ensure access to clean air and fresh water, the need to tackle climate change, the need to safeguard ecosystem services, etc., in an effort to address the full range of both communicable or infectious diseases, which is very present on our mind at the moment, but also non-communicable diseases. So in other words, a One Health approach to EBA can ultimately allow us to better understand the environmental and social determinants of health in a more integrated, coherent manner, and in so doing, building resilience and bringing us closer to achieving the societal benefits that we need to consider in the development of climate and biodiversity conservation policies and restoration strategies. So, just very briefly, if you'll indulge me, Ali, why is that important to human health? And I do want to leave you with this thought, because the environmental drivers of ill health are absolutely striking. 1/4 of the global burden of disease is in fact attributable to preventable environmental factors. And understanding the underlying mechanisms by which those drivers modulate health risks can only be achieved through an interdisciplinary understanding and dialogue, and cross-sectoral dialogue. So I would like to encourage fellow co-panelists, but also everybody that is joining us here today, into thinking about how we can all meaningfully raise ambition by really working together across our respective institutional silos, and leaving our respective logos at the door, and working with essential sectors that are outside of the environment sector, that are outside of our knowledge base and our comfort zones. I think that in so doing, that would really make in so doing, we would come to realize that the health sector is an essential new, but also partner in the development and design of ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation approaches. Thanks.
Thank you, Cristina, for such a powerful and convincing argument on One Health and the need for integration. And it's really great to hear you and all the panelists that EBA, it's not that we practice EBA, it provides that, very basic, because its premise is both on, natural resource management, and the aim is it's human focused, whereas other approaches have very specialized area. So here we can very well integrate One Health element, and we will come back to you, the how of it, why we totally understand. Now the how we will come to all. So with all this, now I will go to Philipp. ICCI has been at the forefront of ecosystem-based adaptation, has been championing EBA for over a decade. And let me say also that, ICCI is one of the rare forward-looking donors who has embraced innovative approaches and made over the period of last 10 years radical changes. I remember project volume used to be, around 2.9 or 3 million and 3 to 4 years of duration. And now you have gone realizing the need for adaptation is on long-term programmatic approach, which can be funded through projects, have gone to, 20 to 30 million, around 8 to 12 years of funding and 10 years. So that's very radical changes. How you reach to this, what are your plans for future, and how you see that we can make adaptation effective. So over to you, Philipp.
Thank you very much, Ali, and thanks to everyone else, and congratulations to you, Ali, for setting up such a great list of panelists. I'm very impressed, and that's actually already part of the answer. It's just bringing together those people and those different disciplines. It's just impressive to listen to you because there you have the different experiences, and for us, as like from the donor position, it's exactly that is what we are asking ourselves. How do we bring together those disciplines within our projects? And that's definitely one of the reasons why we shifted from smaller scale projects towards the integrated large scale projects, where we ask our implementing partners to build consortia, to have a high local content. That means that at least 50% of the implementing agencies within the consortium need to be local or national implementing organizations, so that there is not only the big international or German implementing organizations, but also the local ones. Because I think enabling the local organizations, the local level, is something Joth also mentioned, and that's very, very essential. So it's in the end, it's always very, very difficult to answer the question how to bring together all those different approaches. I think with EBA, we have come very far so far already, because EBA is such a positive example of combining the adaptation approach, some mitigation aspect, and definitely the biodiversity aspect as well. And that's why it is such a good example for the International Climate Initiative. However, we always need to make sure that this does not remain a really nice niche of approaches, bottom-up approaches, but we also need to address the planning level. And that's why we need to make sure, and I think we have been successful there, that NDCs and also national adaptation plans integrate EBA or nature-based solution aspects with regards to adaptation. I think with a new NDC update cycle, we have been very successful so far. And there's one thing I would also add to this discussion, because I must say I'm a bit surprised. That's the first discussion for 1 year where we haven't talked about the concept of green recovery yet. It's not that we need to shift our attention to that. It's just that this has been a concept we've been discussing for the last year. Everybody has been talking about that. I'm not too sure how successfully we really integrated that in the stimulus programs, but some countries at least have tried. And trying that, we need to say that's not only a climate change issue, it's also a biodiversity issue. And let me pick out the example of the NDC partnership, which has this initiative of economic advisors, financing economic advisors that are supposed to consult with the ministries of planning, the ministries of finance within their partner countries to help them shift or design their stimulus programs towards a climate-friendly but also biodiversity-friendly way. And it's very important for us to point out that biodiversity needs to play a role here as well. Well, I think I can leave it here for the moment like that.
Thank you, Philip, for pointing out many these important areas of work. And surely, green recovery is something where, we all need to see, because that will impact local natural resource, could impact local natural resource management, could impact the coping mechanism for future, as they say, for any disaster. And we all know all over the world, climate change is enhancing the frequency of disasters, and the preconditions of any disaster contribute towards either, having less damages or more damages, and also in recovery. So it's critical that we need to have integrated approach and from the very beginning put in place. And there have been good examples in the past, especially Asian tsunami woke up so many people because it was in the coast, and natural barriers such as mangroves or sand dunes played critical role in reducing the damages or where they were removed. So all those things were taken into account into recovery aspects also. So a lot of rapid environmental assessment for green recovery manuals, checklists were developed for mainstream and humanitarian organizations. And I'm happy to share that PADR, FIBA, others, they are coming together to come up with very well integrated approaches in this regard. Again, to audience, please keep asking your questions. We have some questions which have been asked during registration also. So before going into reacting to some of the interventions all the panelists made, one relevant question is, again, what are the barriers to locally led adaptation? And how could identifying mitigation co-benefits would help, in our implementation processes? So let's see barriers in locally led adaptation. I'll start with you, Cynthia, because you mentioned about data and all these and communities' perception and climate science having a balanced approach. Any quick reaction to that? And I would then request any other if they want to come in also. Cynthia? You're mute, Cynthia.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah.
The barrier I'd like to emphasize is about the climate risk information. I think there's still a lot we need to do in forming these longer term partnerships so that the learning around climate change, remember climate change is the second word. So the climate systems are changing at the local scales. And so what we're doing is really with our work, including in an EKI project in the Mesoamerican Reef, on the coral reefs there, is forming those longer term climate risk information partnerships, and also going further than not only temperature, precipitation, all of that is still, of course, the base, but going deeper into sea surface temperatures, pH, the actual further, deeper dive into the science and the ecosystems and their interrelation. So that's the one that I want to, that we're working on night and day, and want to continue. And just if I may just mention also NASA satellite technology, I think, again, I think this links to Ariesta's a wonderful intervention about technology. The new satellite mission that's going to be bringing new information about plankton, aerosols, clouds, and we're very, in our projects, really working to build the bridges to the local community groups and the local implementers, as well as the governmental planners at the various scales, so that they really have the very best information, and that the climate risk information tracking, monitoring, evaluation, so that they can really then minimize the risks in measurable ways.
Thank you, Cynthia. Same question, but a bit modified to you, Ariesta. That how you think these things, the technology transfer can be mainstreamed and also be to developing countries. So what efforts your program or at secretariat level or with parties, or what can be done differently?
Yes, thanks. I think that as I mentioned in the context of the some of the barriers that we found from our work is that the one of the barriers is understanding of the technology. But I think that applies for all the adaptations measures and approaches, whereby the knowledge is there, the practice is there, but it's just not replicable to other parts of the country or other countries that actually need that. And therefore, one of what we're trying to do is to look at this available successful approaches, including hardware, software, and software from the technology point of view, and put it in the context of the work of the tech, raising awareness of these practices through different means. Through the technical publications, to the policy brief, as well as through the sort of like events like Technology Day that we already had, focusing on climate smart agriculture, for example, last year, but also that the one that we are planning to do with you. And one thing that particularly for Technology Executive Committee is doing is to extract the policy recommendations for the national governments, because what we see sometimes there is a disconnect between what the locally context needs and how it can be mainstreamed into the national policy. And therefore, the job of the tech is to scouting these issues and trying to bring this to the attentions of the parties. And every year, the Technology Executive Committee actually produce like what we call a policy recommendation based on the technical work that we're doing on the adaptation technologies. And of course, there are a lot of work that's driven from our sister institution, Climate Technology Center Network, CTCN, which is mainly based on the requests of the country itself. So it's a very much need-based, where, for example, the country would like to have a help feasibility studies with regard to improving the ecosystem or the on the circular economy and so on and so forth. But again, like it's based on the country. So these are ways that we actually trying to help countries actually all to bring the issue at the global level, I would say, by raising awareness.
Thank you, Ariesta. I'll go to Joth now. Joth, there was this question, locally led adaptation, and there is another question, how is gender and vulnerability considered in EBA, and what experiences with the win-win opportunities of considering social inequalities? So that's quite deep question, but how you are trying to address through your project selection or implementation or capacity building?
Yes, thanks, Ali. Let me comment first on the broader issue that you had raised with regard to barriers. And just to make the point that I think availability of data and information is still a major issue, certainly within the Caribbean region. We know that this is a long-standing issue, and we have made strides in terms of data availability. But for some of the islands within the region, getting access to that information still remains a major issue. And I think an approach can be to strengthen where we have repositories of data within regions, and certainly within our region, we know the Climate Change Center, the CARICOM Climate Change Center 5Cs, has an arrangement where data and information is put into a central database, so to speak, so that you can access that information. So I would say, and very candidly, that information, although it has been generated, is still not available, and so that I think is a major issue. Just a comment as well with regards to remote sense information, which was mentioned by Cynthia, I believe. We have a fair amount of remote sense information, but within the Caribbean as well, there is an issue with regards to ground truthing that information. So I would give an example of one of our proponents suggesting that we consider a significant regional project involving remote sense information and looking at issues related to flooding of coastal areas. And one of the questions that we raised is, are the countries aware of this information? And in many cases, they were not. And the other is that the information was not ground truthed, so to speak, in terms of validating the information on the ground. So I think that remains a real issue as well, that although, we have organizations that are generating large databases, the information is not available, local entities are not knowledgeable that information is in fact there. And now hinging on your question with regards to, some of the issues related to vulnerability analysis. Within the region, there are sort of broad, I would say, countrywide vulnerability assessments which have been conducted, and that information is very, very useful. Very often it does not coincide with sites that have been identified for interventions, for example, in our projects on ecosystem-based adaptation. And so we are finding that although you have sort of broad data on vulnerability, it very often is not linked to the sites which the governments or entities would like to pursue. And clearly there's a disconnect, because you would imagine that you would want to pursue those sites where the vulnerability assessments are identifying that there are issues. So I think there needs to be a connection with regards to the perception on the ground as to where the areas are vulnerable and where an intervention is required, and connecting the data to support that. Because in our projects, many of these, we have to sort of generate the baseline information. On your question with regards to gender, that is something that we are striving to do within the region to ensure that we have balance in terms of issues related to gender. So, where we have designed our projects to ensure that we are measuring, that we are promoting the involvement in terms of cross-gender lines. And I think that is a critical issue. We've made some strides in that regard. But, I think there's still a long way to go.
Thank you, Joth. So there is a lot of, I think, opportunities even, within these groups and other to build linkages and functional linkages to move forward. And Cynthia already from NASA is offering, to work with you. I'll come back to you all on a little bit, because it's all emerging. There are surely prerequisites for having effective adaptation measures. So we will try to have some discussion on it. But before going into and better understand our audience also, that see how they can better link with WHO efforts and other, and how there can be practical way forward. So very briefly, Cristina, how does WHO support countries in climate adaptation planning? Because we know WHO from a certain lens. How are you working on climate adaptation planning?
Yes, absolutely, Ali. And maybe before I get into that, I just wanted to make a quick point on what some of the other speakers have said. I think they raised some brilliant. I think they raised some brilliant points as to how we can help to catalyze local engagement. And maybe just to add to some of those brilliant points, the fact that, maybe two key words. And I would say that those two key words would be building trust and co-design. So what is it in those ecosystem-based adaptation processes that ensures that the project in itself is co-designed with the local community, which is an absolutely fundamental component in my view, and only in that way can we build the relationships of trust that make sure that those adaptation projects are then successful. But coming back to your question, WHO has really been engaged for a quarter of a century on climate change and health. And it does work with a number of partners to integrate health at this nexus. So what is it that we do? On the ground level, we help to conduct climate change and health and vulnerability and adaptation assessments. We contribute to the development and implementation of the health component in national adaptation plans. So that is a valuable entry point, I think, for really bringing together the biodiversity component, ecosystem, the added value that ecosystem-based adaptation can bring. We also support country projects on climate change and health, for example, through country missions. For example, a couple of years ago, we initiated a project to help deliver, climate resilient water and sanitation in Africa and Asia across a targeted number of countries to improve climate resilient health service delivery. So again, there you've got a crucial entry point on how we can work, all of us here can work together to really bring that health component into adaptation planning. We also at WHO do so by strengthening the climate resilience of health systems themselves. I mean, we see how catastrophic the results can be there where you have weak health systems. I think COVID-19 is actually a perfect example of that, and so that is a crucial area of an entry point that can be strengthened by bringing in ecosystem-based adaptation, by bringing in more interdisciplinary and cross-sectoral dialogue to avert future crises. We also strengthen climate resilience and environmental sustainability of healthcare facilities themselves. We help to streamline financial resources for health and climate change by providing technical guidance and support to our member states to access international funds that allow for the implementation of health relevant adaptation and mitigation measures. And more recently, also those including ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation. We help to develop important tools and guidance and training packages on climate change and health by supporting integrated surveillance and climate-informed health early warning systems. And for some of the most vulnerable countries, also, WHO, as you may be aware, recently launched a special initiative on climate change and health in small island developing states. So those are all some of the areas in which WHO has been working for many years, and that provide considerable opportunity for strengthening through that One Health lens by really bringing in ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation. And there are also others, but maybe I'll stop here for now.
Okay. Thank you, Cristina. That's really good to see that how WHO have been engaged and what opportunities are to develop some functional linkages with the EBA sector, because I think there is a matching agenda over there. looking into how, broadly we can make EBA more effective, and their question on upscaling. So we will come to that as we are discussing those. M&E is an elephant in the room. M&E is always there in a project, but mostly for reporting purposes. That how can we better, just report to ICCI or some other donor, Jeff. Yeah, so those M&E is usually used for that. Rarely, if I can say, it's used to do course correction. And if I can put more behind, we are all to blame perhaps, and in we include donors also, and we all, perhaps, if you do course correction, it means that perhaps you may need to change some activities or budget and all that. How could we, deal with it? Because I do understand that, when we develop a proposal, I'm just talking about in project sense M&E at the moment, it takes 1 to 2 years for big projects to get funded. Many a time ground realities change by the time. When we start implementing, we get to know many things others are also changed, during. So if you wanna first, there is an issue of not having enough budget for M&E, because we meaning the implementing agencies and, they want more inactivities or staff time and other, so M&E is a bit marginalized, if I can say that. And then when we do M&E, that remains very targeted towards report writing or just having some, briefs which can be distributed. But do we really use M&E to do course correction? Can it be done? At what stages? And how best we can do it? And Philip, I'll come to you also. Can we consider that maybe midterm evaluation, budget and others can be maybe reevaluated, reviewed, and implementation plans? So let's start with maybe now, Joth, because you've been having that. Do you think how much M&E you allow that, recipient can put for in the project proposal development? You're mute, Joth.
All right, there we go. Thanks. Very, very relevant question, Ali. As I highlighted in my brief remarks that we believe that M&E, there's still lip service paid to M&E, and I think this has been the history of that particular field. That we develop an M&E plan, it's usually not very carefully thought through, and therefore we sort of tick boxes as we go along, rather than utilizing the tool to monitor progress, as you say, use it for iteration. Because as you go along and you realize, okay, well, maybe we are not heading in the right direction, that you can do some tuning. To me, that is the value of monitoring. But when we get proposals from the ground, we realize that the design of the M&E plans are weak. So we have to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to fix it, to correct it, to say, okay, we need to better construct it. And it clearly points to a shortcoming with regards to capacity within the region. So there is that issue. And, within the CBF, the EBA facility, we'll be making investments to ensure that there is proper guidance to the individual projects, that they're well designed out, even after the fact. So that, while we have projects that have been submitted and we are moving to implementation, that we can go in and assist in sort of tuning what would be the indicators and how they're set up to be measured, etc. So I think that has to be an ongoing issue, and it's something that we are pursuing. With regards to the overarching ICCI indicators, certainly I think those are extremely useful, because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, we are doing all of this to contribute to some realized goal. And I think in a general sense, those indicators that have been provided to us by ICCI are good and spot on. There is some opportunities for tuning, and our managers at KFW have indicated to us that there is an opportunity to tune. Just to give you an example, for our projects, and I mentioned that all our projects currently are due to be completed within 3 years. one of the indicators that we look at is that coral reefs are restored after an intervention. And I think everyone who works in the field would recognize that within a 3-year horizon, that you will not achieve restoration of a degraded coral reef or a marine ecosystem. And therefore, it's either you expand the time frame with regards to meeting that indicator, or you adjust your indicator itself. So these are some of the discussions that we engaged in. And I think there is need to intervene both at the on-the-ground level to ensure that the capacity is sufficient, there's a good understanding, it is a tool to be applied rather than to tick boxes, and also at the higher end to make sure that we are setting targets and indicators which we can achieve within the time frame of the projects.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come before I go to Philip? Yes, please. Cynthia and then Cristina. Again, mute, please. Unmute yourself.
I have a proposal from this panel that we add to the M&E acronym and make it M&E plus L for learning. Because I think that's what we're really talking about, that in the projects we need to be building in learning, and I would say relations with research scientists as ongoing partners, so that these course corrections, these real learning from that we can enhance it. I think we're all expressing that the M&E box is too much just ticked. So my brief intervention at the end is, let's think about how do we build more learning, M&E plus L, into the EBA projects. Thanks.
No, thank you for pointing out, Cynthia, that it's very critical that we need to, learn. And because, M&E, many a time we use it in project context only, okay, let's do the project activities and, because we are accountable and project manager, but learning as an organization, learning as a sector, all these, it's, goes beyond projects. So that will come with this learning, and, that needs to be then institutionalized and move forward. Okay, Cristina, your point of view on this.
I love that. I love that. Let's do it. Let's call it M&E and learning. Actually, let's call it M&E ML, which is mutual learning. Because that then brings us back to, working together across sectors through to the implementation of One Health approaches, because in fact, One Health provides absolutely essential opportunities for strengthening that monitoring and evaluation component. And when we look back at these projects and we look back at the success that they've had or the failures that they've had, we also have to think about what is it they're monitoring exactly? What are those indicators that are being used? How have they been developed? And to what extent are they integrated indicators? To what extent do they actually seek to explore where co-benefits can be maximized, precisely to enable that learning and precisely to facilitate that iterative process?
I think you're on mute.
Sorry, now I am mute. Okay. These glitches are, Murphy's law is always functional. So Ariesta, in technology transfer and capacities and all this, are you also at any point this monitoring came up, how technology can help us, or still it's someone else's business, if I can say that?
Yes, we do also have a very challenges in terms of monitoring and evaluating the technology. For example, I mentioned earlier in the work that's done by country in identifying technology needs, what are the priorities and technology and so on. One of the weakness of the process is actually at the end, after they conduct a very comprehensive stakeholder engagement to identify the prioritized sectors, prioritized technology needs, and then they built what they called identify barriers and as well as enabling environments, and then they develop countries develop what they call technology action plan. And this is where it's more or less stopped, because then some countries were just, the document stays there, it sits on the shelf, and some countries were lucky, they're able to find the financing, but there is no robust systematic approach of how to monitor and evaluate the implementations of the technology needs that already been identified by the countries. And I guess this is like a common issues, I would say. For example, in the capacity building in the context of UNFCCC, the monitoring and evaluation of capacity building efforts is also an issue that we now is actually trying to address. So I would welcome the monitoring, evaluations and learning part, whereby particularly countries and developing countries can actually engage and be consistently perform this monitoring and evaluations.
Thank you. Philipp, you heard all, and then also from Iki, I see your opening remarks were, also you mentioned many guidebooks and other. So how you see and how much do you think if, a project recipient, they identify course correction and that may need whole, quite significant activity changes, budgets and other. Is this allowed, or how you see your views on this?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a great discussion because it's such an important issue, and we are discussing that internally as well, because from a donor perspective, there's always one big risk, and that's the risk that at the very moment where you commission a project, the attention to this project decreases significantly because you're very proud you found a good project design, you can announce that it is now commissioned, and that will most likely have a great impact. But then you fail to monitor this impact as closely as you've been preparing this project. And we have to work very hard there. And that's what we are doing with the monitoring and with the indicators, but also with regard to evaluation. And there we needed to shift our system as well. So far, we had an evaluation and final evaluation after the end of a project. That means you commission a project, a couple of years later, it is finished. Then we wait for the final report. Then we need to accept the final report, which takes some time as well. And then it goes to external evaluation. And maybe a couple of years after this project indeed ended, we received the evaluation report, and that's just not accurate, to be honest. So what we introduced now to our large-scale projects is that there is a mandatory midterm evaluation, and that for some projects we also introduced a certain specific, certain kind of impact evaluation, which means that we hire a team that is following the project from the very beginning, starting with the kickoff meeting and all this, the design of the project and then the implementation period, so that we have an ongoing evaluation and can hopefully learn from the best practices, but also from the mistakes, because I think we need to be honest. Not all projects can be successful in all their components. So we need to dare to fail as well and accept failure and name it as well. So we need to learn out of that as well. But in the end, that's also a question of knowledge management, because we have a couple of hundred projects going on, and it's so important to not only look at this projects as such, but also as the scope, the whole idea of the project, and try to find out how to bring together the best practices and how to find the mechanisms that are working in some projects and that could be transferred to other projects, to other landscapes, or upscaled within the regions, or so on. So it is very essential that you also invest money and capacity into this monitoring and evaluation. And that's sometimes difficult to explain to the people who are providing this money. But I really like this discussion here, and I like to talk about M&A, NL, and ML because that's also so important. And this learning factor is something which is where we all can improve. We have so many great projects out there, but it's so complex that it's impossible to see where they are and where they could be transferred and who the people would be to talk to. And that's why, well, knowledge exchanges, networks like this one are so important. And I think that we all need to work together there and help each other how to monitor projects and how to transfer the lessons learned to other sectors.
Thank you, Philip. It's really good to see that one of the major donors also you're thinking about and putting measures in place. I've been this is I think some of you know I've been trying for the last 3-4 years to have an event just to share failures. It won't be what success and rosy pictures we can say only about failures. So I would love, and also audience, we need to have critical mass, at least 6 or 7 organizations coming together. And I think, Philip would also be there to, encourage all recipients of ICCI, to have an event where we will share all our failures, where we went wrong and how did or could not do the course correction due to what reason, so that there is a learning, we can do things differently. We are at the end of our, really good. And before coming to you for 40 to 60-second last take-home message or any intervention you want to do, there are a couple of things I would just very quickly respond to those. What is relationship between NBS and EBA? As we heard many, NBS is an umbrella term which was, adopted in 2016 at World Conservation Congress, and that's an umbrella term. And under that, for climate adaptation is EBA and EBM. So it is not versus. Many a time we go into this, academic discourses. And let me say here, communities' problems, communities' issues, and solutions, they are not determined or resolved by our academic discourses or boundaries or definitions. So we need to go beyond these elements, and that's critical. And many times we get, in this, but this is very good. And thank you for asking this question. It helped and gave the opportunity to explain it. And then there was one, what are we expecting out of COP26 on EBA? We are working very closely, and you can see UNFCCC representative is also here. We are working very closely with Nairobi Work Program, and in FIBA, all of you are part of it, over 90 organizations with donors, with parties, with, think tanks. So we will be having lots of events, and it's good that, UK presidency and other nature-based solution and nature-based solution for climate adaptation is one of the top priorities. So we are already positioning ourselves through SAPSTA and other, and lot of discussions we've been engaged. So we will be sharing more info through that. So now I'll come to the last point, 40 second. If you can just give last your take-home message to our audience. So let's start with anyone, maybe Joth or Cynthia. Okay.
My last word is for the monitoring and evaluation plus mutual learning, ML. What we need is co-generation of climate risk information for longer term EBA projects. That's my take-home message.
Thank you, Cynthia. Ariesta?
Sorry if I may have a bit more than 40 seconds because there is also a question that was directed to me earlier. This is about the adaptation technology is different than EBA. I would like to come back again to my first interventions about what we're looking into the technologies to support adaptations is actually including hardware, software, and orgware. And EBA is exactly the approach that has this type of integration. So supported by appropriate policy, we can reduce the barriers and also supported by the right policy, we can actually include or integrate this in the national adaptation planning and implementations. My key take-home or takeaway message is that we do need to have transformational change and innovative approaches. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to talk about the innovative approaches. It's beyond technologies. It's not only technology if you want to scale up and the disseminations of the EBA and its implementations. But this innovation must be inclusive and equitable, covering the diverse expertise, knowledge, views, and treated fairly and just. Basically, no one should be left behind. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, Ariesta, and thank you for explaining this innovation, because that's so critical, because we need to have multi-pronged approaches, and that's where innovation would come in. Okay, Joth, what's your last take-home message?
Thanks very much, Ali. Something that we sort of touched on, and that is the issue of green recovery. That Philipp mentioned, that we didn't really get into too much detail, but certainly there's been a lot of learning through this COVID-19 experience. And one of the things that we have realized is that, when you engage local groups on the ground who are within the area that you're looking to have an intervention, that the disruptions are less as compared to when you are dealing with larger organizations who have to fly personnel in, etc. So for me, just touching on that issue with regards to the impact of COVID-19 and the green recovery, that the investments in local groups and communities, certainly which is inherent in the approach which is promulgated by EBA, is something that really works. It builds resilience. And I think, this is something that we need to push forward with. And in closing, just to say thanks and congratulations to IKI on the support, the commitment that they have given with regards to the moving forward of ecosystem-based adaptation.
Thank you. Cristina?
Thank you so much, Ali. Okay, sure. Let's go with green recovery. But since we love to redefine terms on this panel and we're in this iterative learning process, let's call it a healthy and green recovery. I mean, if one of the things that we're doing is actually learning from our failures, we have some pretty catastrophic failures when it comes to our management of ecosystems and how that permeates into tangible human health outcomes. I think we are all living this right now. And I think that there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from that. So just drawing on that, I won't get into the details of it, but just to point out that, with the WHO Manifesto for a Healthy and Green Recovery really does provide a set of essential entry points in how we can get there. Not just green, it needs to be healthy, not just for planet, but also for people. And I think that really goes to the heart of what nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based mitigation really are. I'm really a firm believer also that our success as a global community in tackling these interrelated challenges, the interrelated biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, and meeting the SDGs absolutely hinges on establishing strategic partnerships at the local, national, regional, and of course, global levels to design, finance, and implement policies, plans, and programs that are coordinated, coherent, and aligned. Let's break through those silos. We absolutely need to do that. Let's innovate, not only in terms of technological innovation. Let's innovate our governance systems. Let's innovate our legislative systems. Let's innovate in our financial mechanisms. Let's step up ambition, investment for climate, for nature, but also for healthy and resilient ecosystems and societies through whole of government and whole of society approaches. And I just want to say that to do so, we really already have the right building blocks. We have more evidence today than at any other time in recent history. We have greater awareness today, thanks to COVID-19, than any other time in recent history. We certainly have more pressing need than any other time in recent history. And what we desperately need now is to catalyze that political will and to put in place the essential governmental, political, legislative, and financial structures to use these building blocks to build back greener, to build back better, and to achieve more just and equitable societies. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Cristina. Philipp, your last words.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, I would say I think we are all witnessing now a very impressive development over the last months, especially with regard to mitigation. I think we are seeing now some long-term strategies that we haven't expected. We see some movement with regards to national NDCs, and the G7 are really moving impressively. And I think that is all a great momentum, but let us all make sure that adaptation is on board, that biodiversity is on board, and climate finance as well. And we can use this momentum to get also a big success for adaptation and biodiversity. And I think EBA is a great instrument for that.
Thank you, Philipp. So it's great to have all these discussion points, which are quite action oriented. They are all doable. So we will be taking out recommendations out of this discussion. And in the end, I'll just wrap up. There was a question, and now I will address that. How, scaling up EBA. There's a question, is it more funding for EBA or greater prominence of EBA in national policies? I would say that all is needed. Donors, taxpayers' money can go to a certain extent, unless and until it becomes the top priority in public sector investment. Private sector, from their own business point of view, to make it carbon neutral, carbon negative, as many big companies have already given that resolve. But unless and until public sector investment comes in, and for that they need to see return on investment. So by doing M&E, by doing data-driven and all ecological and social and economic aspects, because it's not that policymakers don't want to invest on EB. They have their challenges, which is again another elephant in the room, is for upscaling and all this, is many a time they have to respond to their next election cycle also. For that long term, things can sometimes get marginalized and popular decisions need to be taken. How can we overcome that? Because for them, attention span is maybe next election with all their enthusiasm and all this, because if they are there, they can make the difference. So many a time it's an either or decision also. So there are so many factors which might remain, challenges, but still keeping that in mind, how can we have an integrated approach? How can invest more on M&E? How we can work together to learn from each other, and how come we can learn from each other failures. So I expect next when we will approach you all, to let's only share our failures. You all will be on that panel. And we can make it happen. It's not that things have not changed. Things have changed. Let's look back 10 years ago in our projects, in our funding, in our implementation processes, in our, tsunami woken up and green recovery, and now, building back better and greener. Those things are there. We need more political resolve. And if, as they say, the change does not require that everyone is on board. Diversity has its own value. But some people, if they come together, things can be moved forward. I know from this discussion, we have very much direct, serious action points. If we have a will, we can take those forward. So we look forward working with you all on these elements, how best to take those forward and make things happen and differently. So thanks a lot, everyone. And virtually we can clap for all you and all of us. And I hand over back to Harold Lozak for you for the next segment. And thank you everyone again.
Thank you very much for this extraordinary panel. This was really a highlight, but it was only a part of this successful conference, because we have now, starting in about 15 minutes, a series of breakout sessions. We have 2 rounds with 5 interactive sessions, which are strictly with a strictly enforced duration of 30 minutes each. And there will be in round 1 the following topics and hosts. We have session 1, new projects in the BMU IKI portfolio with a focus on Latin America and the Caribbean. And the host is the BMU IKI and the implementing agency ZUUG. In session 2, we have the subnational EBA implementation, the case of Sao Paulo. It's Brazilian related. And the host is ProAdapta Brazil and the state of Sao Paulo. The third session will work on EBA Goes Digital, plans and needs for the upcoming virtual training course. And this session will be hosted by GIZ and IUCN together. In session 4 on green and gray infrastructure, we will have as hosts the Green-Gray Community of Practice, CI, Conservation International, FIBA, the Friends of EBA, and ACOM. And session 5, we have long-term monitoring of the performance of EBA projects, a very important issue that we, as we had heard in the panel. And this session will be hosted by the Nairobi Working Program Expert Group on Knowledge Gaps. In round 2, which will start at 18:20 Central European Summertime or 12:20 Eastern Daylight Time, we have the following sessions. Session 1, challenges of scaling up and financing EBA, hosted by UNEP, IUCN, and Friends of EBA. In session 2, we will discuss why EBA matters in infrastructure. And the hosts are GIZ and EcoConsult. The third session will discuss integrating the forestry and fisheries aquaculture sectors in national adaptation plans, a systems approach. This session will be hosted by FAO. Session 4 Why Gender Matters for Ecosystem-Based Adaptation will be hosted by IISD and GIZ. And the last one, session 5 on biodiversity, climate, One Health, and EBA will be hosted by the EcoHealth Alliance, WHO, IUCN, and Friends of EBA. Each event can be joined by a specific link, which you can find in the app. The breakout sessions end at 18:50 Central European Summertime or 12:50 Eastern Daylight Time. And after this, we are going to return to the main conference room for the closing remarks of this event. So we have a little break now, coffee break, and we'll start soon with the first round of interactive breakout sessions. Thank you very much.